In 2009, coal miners in Colombia pulled something out of the earth that stopped scientists cold. Not a gemstone, not a fossil leaf, a vertebra, the size of a dinner plate. And when the paleontologist who examined it ran the calculations, the number that came back did not make sense. Not for a snake, not for anything alive on land. The largest snake alive today is the green anaconda. It reaches approximately 8 to 9 meters in exceptional individuals. It weighs up to 250 kilograms. By every measurement available to us, it sits near the upper limit, the approximate ceiling of what a snake can be. The fossil record disagrees. What those miners uncovered in the Cerrejón coal mine was the remains of a snake that exceeded every known limit, something that made the anaconda look like a rough draft. The ancient world built something bigger, much bigger. How large does a snake have to be before it stops being an animal and starts being something else? Before the word snake no longer covers what you are looking at, Titanoboa cerrejonensis was 13 meters long, estimated at over 1,000 kilograms. And size was not even the strangest thing about it. Almost everything about this animal challenged what we thought we understood about ancient climates, about reptile biology, about what this planet was capable of producing. And the reason it existed at all tells us something about this planet that most people have never considered. In this video, you will learn what Titanoboa actually was. Not the headline, not the rough number, the full picture. What it ate, how it killed, why it reached that size, and what its existence tells us about the ancient world that produced it. Because the story of Titanoboa is not just the story of a giant snake. It is the story of a world so different from the one we know, so extreme in its conditions, that it produced life we are still working to fully explain. A world where the rules about size, about what a living thing could become, were being written differently. And Titanoboa was the proof. In February of 2009, a team of paleontologists published a paper in the journal Nature. The paper described a new species, discovered in the Cerrejón coal mine in northern Colombia, named Titanoboa cerrejonensis. The response from a scientific community was not routine, because what the paper described did not fit comfortably inside existing frameworks. Not for what a snake could be, not for what a reptile could be, not for what the ancient world's climate was understood to have been. Titanoboa was not simply a large prehistoric snake. It was a discovery that forced a reassessment of multiple things scientists thought they understood about ancient climates, about ancient ecosystems, and about the upper physical limits of reptile biology. To understand why Titanoboa was possible and why its existence matters beyond the headline about size, we need to understand the world it lived in. 60 million years ago, the non-avian dinosaurs had been gone for approximately 6 million years. The Great Extinction had cleared the ecological stage, and into that cleared space, across every continent and every environment, new forms of life were establishing themselves. What filled the top of the South American food chain during this period, in the dense, hot, ancient jungle that would eventually become Colombia, was not a mammal, not a bird, not anything warm-blooded. It was a snake, and it was unlike anything the fossil record had shown us before. The Cerrejón mine is not a glamorous fossil site. It is one of the largest open-pit coal mines in the world. A working industrial operation in the department of La Guajira in northern Colombia. Not the kind of place where paleontologists typically expect to make defining discoveries. But the Cerrejón mine cuts deep into rock from the Paleocene epoch, 60 to 58 million years old. And that ancient rock, exposed by industrial excavation on a massive scale, turned out to contain one of the most significant tropical fossil deposits ever found. The first Titanoboa fossils were identified by Jonathan Block of the Florida Museum of Natural History and Carlos Jaramillo of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. What they found, and what subsequent excavations continued to produce, was material from a minimum of 28 individual snakes. 28 individuals. Not a single lucky find. A population. A snapshot of an animal that was genuinely present in numbers in the ancient Cerrejón ecosystem. The size estimate came from the vertebrae. In living snakes, there is a documented relationship between the dimensions of the vertebrae and the total length and mass of the animal. By applying that relationship to the Titanoboa fossils and cross-referencing across multiple specimens, the research team arrived at their estimates. Approximately 13 meters in length. Mass estimates across the published literature range between approximately 1,000 and 1,135 kilograms. Most calculations place the animal at well over a metric ton. The largest snake the fossil record has confirmed to date, and by most estimates, substantially larger than any other known species. But here is where the Titanoboa discovery moved well beyond being remarkable for size alone. The research team did not simply measure the fossils. They asked a different question. What would the world need to look like? What would the climate need to be for a cold-blooded animal to reach and sustain this confirmed mass? Cold-blooded animals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, do not generate their own body heat. Their body temperature tracks the temperature of the environment around them, and their metabolism, the rate at which they process food and fuel the biological functions of a body this large, is directly tied to that environmental temperature. For a cold-blooded animal to maintain a body well over a metric ton, to fuel the processes required to keep that mass alive and functional, the surrounding environment would need to be extraordinarily warm. Warmer than any sustained tropical environment on Earth today. The research team ran the numbers. To support a cold-blooded animal of Titanoboa's confirmed mass, the mean annual temperature of the ancient Cerrejón environment would need to have been between roughly 30 and 34 degrees Celsius. That is approximately 3 to 4 degrees warmer than the hottest sustained tropical environments on Earth right now. Titanoboa was not just a fossil of a giant prehistoric snake. It was a thermometer, a biological record of how hot the ancient world actually was, preserved not in ice cores or sediment samples, but in the bones of the largest land predator of its era. It is worth noting that this methodology has not been without debate. Some researchers have questioned the specific temperature figures derived from the size-to-temperature calculation, arguing that the upper bounds may be lower, but that the relationship between body mass and ambient temperature is less linear than the model assumes. That debate continues, but the core finding, that Titanoboa required significantly warmer conditions than any modern tropical environment, remains broadly accepted across the scientific literature. The thermometer analogy holds. The exact reading remains a subject of refinement, and the implications of that finding moved quickly through the scientific community. Because if Titanoboa's confirmed mass pointed to temperatures that high in the Paleocene tropics, then the ancient world was not simply warmer than we thought. It was warm enough to produce biology we had never imagined possible. And the question that followed was immediate. If the climate made this animal possible, what else did that climate produce? 60 million years ago, the landmass that would become South America was not the continent we know today. It was an island continent, separated from North America by ocean, only recently finished pulling away from Africa, isolated by deep water on every side. That isolation matters, because it meant the animals of ancient South America developed without competition from, or contact with, the large mammals establishing themselves elsewhere. The ecological roles that mammals were filling on other continents. In South America, other things filled them. And in the hot, wet, dense jungle of ancient Colombia, at the top of that isolated ecosystem, Titanoboa filled the role that nothing else was large enough to contest. The Cerrejón Formation has given paleontologists an extraordinarily detailed picture of what Titanoboa's world actually contained. Because the fossils in that rock are not just Titanoboa. The same deposits produced ancient crocodilians, cerrejonensis, a species whose skull reached approximately 1.5 meters in length. Serious predators in their own right. They produced Carbonemys cofrinii, a giant prehistoric turtle whose shell measured approximately 1.7 meters in length. An animal of extraordinary mass by any modern comparison. They produced large ancient fish, giant lumpfish, an ecosystem where the concept of large had been recalibrated at every level, not just at the top. This is one of the most important points in the entire Titanoboa story. Titanoboa was not an anomaly dropped into a normal world. It was the likely apex animal of an ecosystem where extreme body size was a broad pattern, where the heat, the isolation, and the particular ecological conditions of ancient Colombia had pushed multiple lineages toward large body sizes at the same time. The snake was the headline. The ecosystem was the story. And that ecosystem was built around water. The ancient Cerrejón environment was not dry jungle. It was a vast, hot, shallow river and swamp system, interspersed with dense tropical forest. The waterways were slow, warm, and rich with fish. This matters for understanding how Titanoboa lived, because the available evidence strongly suggests Titanoboa was primarily a river and swamp predator. A snake well over a metric ton faces a significant physical challenge on land. Moving that mass requires enormous muscular effort against gravity. But in water, supported by buoyancy, the energy cost of movement drops dramatically. Modern anacondas, the largest living snakes, are also strongly aquatic for the same reason. The largest bodies require the support of water to move with any efficiency. Well suited for ambush in the warm, murky, shallow waterways of ancient Colombia, wading in the dark water, patient in a way that only very large, very secure predators can afford to be. If what you have heard so far has changed how you think about the ancient world, understand that we have not yet reached the strangest part. This channel follows evidence into places most content does not go. If that matters to you, subscribe now, because the next chapter is where this gets genuinely unsettling. A snake of 13 meters and well over a metric ton needs to eat. Not occasionally, consistently. To maintain a body of that mass requires caloric input that the ancient Cerrejón ecosystem would need to support on a regular basis. The fossil evidence gives us partial answers. The ancient fish of the Cerrejón waterways were not small. Several species were large enough to constitute a substantial meal even for an animal of Titanoboa's scale. The structure of the jaw and the aquatic nature of the confirmed ecosystem suggests fish were a primary component of its diet. The ancient crocodilians of the same waterways, Cerrejonensis with its substantial skull, shared the same environment. Whether Titanoboa actively preyed on them, or whether the two large predators maintained a relationship of competition and distance, the fossil record has not resolved. What it has resolved is that they occupied the same water. At the same time, that fact alone changes the character of the ancient Cerrejón ecosystem significantly. Now, the killing itself. Titanoboa was a constrictor. The jaw structure, the body proportions, and the muscular architecture implied by the skeletal remains all point to constriction as its primary method. Constriction is widely misunderstood. The common assumption is that a constricting snake suffocates its prey, that it squeezes until the animal cannot breathe. That is not the primary mechanism. Research on modern constrictors has shown that the dominant killing process is circulatory arrest, not suffocation. The pressure applied by the coils is sufficient to stop blood flow to the brain and heart faster than oxygen deprivation alone would cause death. The prey's circulatory system stops before its lungs do. For a snake of Titanoboa's confirmed mass, the constriction force available would have been extraordinary. Research on the scaling relationship between snake body mass and constriction force suggests the pressure Titanoboa could apply would have been among the highest of any constrictor in the fossil record. But the most important thing about how Titanoboa killed is not the force. It is the patience. Large constrictors do not chase prey across distance. They position themselves where prey will come to them. They wait, and then they strike, fast, precise, committed, before the prey has time to process what is happening. In the warm, murky, shallow waterways of ancient Colombia, where visibility was low, the vegetation dense, and the water itself concealing. That strategy was close to perfect. Titanoboa did not need speed across a landscape. It needed to be faster than the moment of recognition. And at 13 meters in dark water, with a strike reach that nothing in that ecosystem could match, Titanoboa existed for approximately 3 million years. From roughly 60 to 58 million years ago. 3 million years is a long time by any human measure. In geological terms, in the context of the deep time this channel moves through, it is a relatively narrow window. And then Titanoboa disappeared from the fossil record. The reasons are not entirely resolved, but the primary evidence points toward the same variable that made Titanoboa possible in the first place. Temperature. The extraordinary heat of the early Paleocene, the conditions that allowed a cold-blooded animal to fuel a body well over a metric ton, did not persist indefinitely. Global temperatures began a long, gradual decline. The hottest period of the post-extinction world passed. The tropical environments that had supported the Cerrejón ecosystem began to shift. Cooler in some regions, less stable, less consistently extreme. For a cold-blooded animal dependent on extreme ambient heat to maintain an extreme body, that cooling was not survivable. Not at that size. The metabolism that the heat had made possible became a liability as temperatures fell. A body well over a metric ton that cannot generate its own warmth requires the world to stay warm for it. The world that had sustained it began to withdraw, and with it, the largest snake the world had ever produced was gone. Not because it failed as a design, but because the world it was designed for no longer existed. What Titanoboa left behind is less visible than its fossils, but in some ways more significant, because the discovery of Titanoboa did not simply add a name to the list of prehistoric creatures. It changed several things scientists thought they understood about the post-extinction world. It provided direct biological evidence for Paleocene tropical temperatures, evidence that complemented and in some cases extended what sediment and isotope studies had suggested. It demonstrated that the post-extinction world was not a slow, quiet recovery. It was hot, competitive, and capable of producing apex predators that rivaled anything the Cretaceous had managed. And it forced a reassessment of what is biologically possible under different climate conditions. If a world running 3 to 4 degrees warmer than today's hottest tropics could produce Titanoboa, what does that tell us about the relationship between temperature and the upper limits of life? The scientists who study Titanoboa are still developing that answer. Here is what the full record of Titanoboa actually shows. A snake 13 meters long and well over a metric ton in mass did not appear by accident. It appeared because the world that produced it was running at a temperature the modern world does not sustain. Because it occupied an isolated continent where the space at the top of the food chain was available to fill. Because the waterways of ancient Colombia provided precisely the environment its design required. Every condition aligned, and nature filled that space with something that fit it completely. But the most important thing Titanoboa tells us is not about snakes. It is about the direct connection between climate and biology. The ancient world was not a fixed backdrop against which life played out. It was an active condition, a set of physical parameters that determined what was biologically possible. When those parameters were extreme, when the heat of the Paleocene tropics exceeded anything the modern world sustains, the biology that resulted was extreme in proportion. Titanoboa was not a freak. It was a result, a direct, measurable consequence of a world operating at conditions outside our current experience. And here's the fact that lingers. Those temperatures, the conditions that produce Titanoboa, are not outside the range of what some climate models project for the long-term future under high-emission scenarios. The timescales are vastly different. The biological implications would not map cleanly from one context to the other. But the direction, in physical terms, is not unfamiliar. And Titanoboa is a record precise, biological, undeniable of what the world looked like the last time it moved in that direction. The ancient world is not entirely past. In some physical sense, it is a direction. What we covered today is the ancient world's largest confirmed snake, an animal with confirmed vertebrae, confirmed mass estimates, confirmed climate implications. There's another chapter in the ancient world's record of extreme body size. Not a snake, not a land animal of any kind, something that appeared in the fossil record of the ancient oceans. Known primarily from fragments, so large they are difficult to attribute to any confirmed lineage with confidence. The measurements are disputed in the literature. The specimens are frustratingly incomplete. But what has been recovered suggests an animal operating at a scale that challenges the limits of what we thought vertebrate biology could sustain. Scientists have not been able to dismiss it. They have also not been able to fully explain it. We will go there next. If this changed how you think about the ancient world, leave a comment with what surprised you most. Was it the size? Was it the climate connection? Was it the ecosystem that produced it? The giant turtles, the enormous crocodilians, the world where extreme body size was a pattern across multiple species simultaneously? That tells us which direction to go next. And if you have not yet subscribed, this is the moment. Because the next video goes into territory that most channels will not touch. And we always follow the deepest evidence. The ancient world did not produce small things when the conditions allowed otherwise.